The most brutal twist? She saves his life, and that's exactly what ruins hers. Everybody thinks betrayal is the sharpest pain in this story. Wrong. The real heartbreak is that Isabella does the most human thing possible. She donates blood to a dying man, and the world answers by turning her name into product code at a masked donor auction. Lorenzo knows that if she had let him die, she would have stayed poor, tired, and anonymous, but safe. Instead, both of them survive, and that turns out to be the cruelest trap of all.
For Isabella Moretti, being penniless was a full-time occupation. At 24, she was a ghost, haunting 2 different jobs in Venice, her nights always ending in the quiet ritual of counting coins for sustenance. By day, she cleaned a sterile clinic in Santa Croce. By night, she mended fine garments for a clientele that never saw her. A deep, persistent ache settled in her very marrow, a whisper that one misstep would shatter her fragile existence. Her small apartment was a reflection of her spirit, walls weeping with damp, windows that rattled in the wind, and a heater that promised only a cold demise. The one warmth in that cold, crumbling space was her father. Giorgio Moretti, once a celebrated artisan for Venice's elite, now lived in the twilight world of the near-blind after a stroke. His pride had become a corrosive thing, silently devouring him as Izzy shouldered every burden. They lived by a silent, painful pact. He would act as if he didn't mind his dependence, and she would act as if she weren't breaking under the strain. But on this Thursday, fate chose to press down harder with a delayed paycheck and a pharmacist who refused to extend them his medicine on trust. So Izzy found herself racing back to the clinic, stepping into a scene of controlled chaos. Paramedics moved a gurney with the intense focus reserved for a life hanging by a thread. A nurse bolted ahead as another shouted for plasma, and guarding the patient were 3 men in dark suits, their presence less like concerned family and more like a grim honor guard. Izzy made herself small, melting into the wall as they swept past. Her gaze snagged on a dark, wet bloom of crimson soaking the sheets. A mask obscured his face, but it couldn't hide a strong jaw or the blooming purple bruise on his temple. The man on that gurney was likely in his late 30s, his powerful frame evident even as life bled from him. Dressed in clothes that spoke of immense wealth, he carried the aura of a man utterly unaccustomed to powerlessness. As they rushed by the phlebotomy station, his eyes flew open. That gaze struck Izzy with the force of a physical impact. Through the haze of pain, his mind was a razor. He executed a swift, cold inventory of his surroundings, the corridor, the rooms, his men, the staff, before his eyes found hers. It was a moment, nothing more, but it was a cold, hard appraisal, not a plea for help. Before consciousness deserted him again, the entire procession disappeared through a set of double doors, leaving only the sterile scent of antiseptic and the faint, sharp tang of gunpowder. Izzy stood rooted to the spot, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. A clipped voice, a nurse named Paula, shattered her trance. Paula, usually a pillar of calm, was near panic as she scanned donor manifests. "I need O negative," she snapped into the phone. "Not in an hour, right now." A knot of ice formed in Izzy's stomach. O negative was her blood type. She had registered 2 years prior, after a physician warned that a blood shortage was its own kind of death sentence. Those words had been seared into her mind. She had signed up, believing it was a way for someone with nothing to give something of infinite value. Paula ended the call, her gaze landing on Izzy with unnerving speed. In the ensuing silence, the nurse closed the space between them. A few curt questions confirmed Izzy was a match. Izzy dared to ask who the man was. Paula's voice fell to a conspiratorial hush. "He attracts the sort of enemies who aren't afraid to settle scores inside a hospital." It was all the explanation offered. Izzy tried to refuse, her voice thin as she mentioned her fatigue. The fact she hadn't eaten since 6 that morning. What if I can't? The question hung in the air, but Paula's gaze was unrelenting. By the time I find someone else, his time may have already run out. Logically, his identity was irrelevant. The great equalizer of exsanguination made all men the same. Yet a primal instinct inside Izzy screamed a warning. It wasn't a wish for his death, but a deep, visceral reaction honed by a life spent watching men like him treat the world and everyone in it like pieces on a board for their own cruel games. Her resistance was rooted in a simple truth. Men who command through fear do not foster a gentle world. But what broke her resolve was the searing memory of her own father in that very hospital, waiting 3 long hours for a life-saving transfusion. The image of herself, praying to a simple bag of plasma as if it were a holy relic, dissolved her hesitation. "All right," she whispered. "Tell me where to go." 10 minutes later, she sat in the donor's chair, staring at consent forms that were nothing but a blur. Another nurse noted her slight build, then shot a look at the suit standing guard in the hall who offered only silence. His unblinking stare was all the answer required. The nurse began to prepare the equipment. Izzy had always despised needles, but the tense, manufactured quiet in the room was infinitely worse. It felt staged, like a scene they were all forced to play. "Is his family here?" she asked, desperate to break the spell. "It is better that you do not ask," the nurse replied sharply. Izzy understood the unspoken command. He's important, then. The nurse's silence was the only confirmation she would get. A band tightened around Izzy's bicep. She clenched her fist. The needle slid into her vein. She winced, turning her head to watch the dark ribbon of her own blood snake through a transparent tube. The sight of her life force draining away was disorienting, a stark reminder of her own fragility. A little too much, and all of it, the debt, the exhaustion, the quiet lies, would simply cease to be. Her mind flashed to the patient's fierce, commanding eyes. He seemed like the kind of man who could order death itself to stand down. "Is he conscious?" she murmured. "He drifts in and out." "Does he know where the blood is coming from?" The nurse gave her a peculiar glance. "I imagine he's aware that we are trying to prevent his death." Izzy's gaze fell to a blank label on the bag. On an unexplainable impulse, she found a pen and wrote 2 words in the corner: "Non morire." The nurse noticed and opened her mouth to object, but then simply affixed the label to the bag. When it was done, Izzy felt faint and cold. She drank the juice they offered, willing the world to stop tilting on its axis. The patient's men remained like statues in the corridor. One of them accepted the bag of blood from the nurse with a strange solemnity and immediately made for the emergency room. Izzy rose, pressing gauze to the crook of her arm. As she left, she passed an alcove where a doctor was stripping off his bloody gloves, speaking to an older, silver-haired man in a fine overcoat. "We've stabilized the bleeding for the moment," the doctor was saying, "but if another complication arises—" The man interrupted him. "It will not." The doctor looked exhausted. "That isn't how medicine operates." The older man turned, his profile like a blade. He was not the man from the gurney. He possessed the quiet gravity of a king's most trusted advisor. His eyes swept over Izzy in a brief, dismissive inventory before returning to the doctor. "Tonight," he stated with chilling finality, "medicine will do as it is commanded." The doctor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Izzy fled before she could be noticed, desperate to melt back into the anonymity of the city. The night air was a shock against her skin. Venice was unnervingly silent, its alleyways vacant, its dark canals reflecting an empty sky. She drew her scarf tighter and began the long journey home. Izzy's walk home is a nightly ritual, her attempt to put physical distance between herself and the day's hardships. In her mind, she rewrites the night's events, framing the blood donation as a simple act of charity to obscure the violence at its core. She arrives home after 1 a.m, but the lingering hospital scent is an immediate betrayal. Her father, Giorgio, is waiting like a sentinel, his questions about her lateness and the smell both gentle and sharp. She offers only a weary gesture, praying he will let it go. Her first instinct is to lie, citing a difficult shift at work. When he sees through the fiction, she offers a heavily redacted version of the truth. A person was in desperate need of blood. This alone is enough to trigger Giorgio's paternal fears, a quiet panic born from knowing the dark currents that run beneath their city. To silence his impending lecture on caution, she draws near, her touch on his arm a calming anchor as she describes the man's dire state. His next question, whether he survived, unearths the night's trauma for a heartbeat before she buries it again, claiming ignorance. She began to straighten the tiny apartment, a small routine to keep the edges of her anxiety from fraying. A dull, throbbing ache from the needle's puncture was a constant physical reminder of her crushing poverty. While her circumstances hadn't changed, a profound sense of dread had taken hold, lodging in her chest like a silent scream. Sleep was not a refuge, but a battlefield where exhaustion fought a losing war against haunting images. The glare of clinic lights, and the wounded man's eyes, too lucid, too piercing, burned into her memory. Dawn breaks, but for Izzy, the night never ended. She moves with the stealth of a thief, splashing her face with cold water to avoid waking her father. Her mind is racing, desperately trying to conjure some scheme, any scheme, to fend off financial ruin. She finds herself bargaining with the universe for another 48 hours, for just one more week, trying to hold her life together with nothing but hope and borrowed time. And then 3 sharp raps on the door cut through the morning stillness. She knows instantly that this is not a neighbor asking for a cup of sugar. This knock has weight, it has authority, and it turns the blood in her veins to ice. No one has ever come to her door with such purpose. The sound startles her father awake, a man confined to his chair by a body that has betrayed him. "Who is that?" her father asks, his voice rough with sleep. "I don't know," she answers, the words feeling foreign and brittle in her own mouth. The knocking comes again, with the same insistent, unwavering rhythm. The moment her fingers make contact with the lock, a cold shock of violation shoots through her. It has been tampered with. Someone has already been here, and her skin begins to crawl. A deep, premonitory chill seeped into her bones before her hand even touched the knob. The man waiting there was an apparition of violence, his skin a bloodless white, his face a brutal canvas of contusions and a fresh, weeping gash. She knew him, not from a photograph, but from a scar seared upon her soul. His gaze found hers, unwavering, sharp, and radiating an absolute, unspoken authority. A second man stood behind him, a statue carved from shadow, the very definition of a sentinel. Izzy used the door as a flimsy shield, her voice a tremor as she demanded their names. The first man studied her for a heartbeat, then uttered it, Lorenzo Reishi. The name itself was a threat, a synonym for the fear and power that governed the city's secret life. His legitimate ventures were but a veil over his true domain. His legend was forged in solving problems the law could not abide. But it was the timing, not the man, that truly stole her breath. He had materialized mere hours after her anonymous gift. "You shouldn't be here," she breathed, and his response was a grave murmur of agreement. When her father called out, Lorenzo's attention shifted, his eyes turning to cold instruments of analysis, utterly devoid of compassion. "Let me enter," Lorenzo stated, but Izzy's spirit screamed its refusal. He absorbed her defiance without a flicker of emotion before revealing the catastrophe: a security failure at the clinic. Her confidential file was now for sale. The words hung in the air, a crushing weight. With a terrible serenity, Lorenzo recited the stolen data, his quiet voice making the menace 1,000 times more intimate. She could only shake her head in denial. "He speaks the truth," the second man, Matteo Santoro, interjected, his tone cultured and smooth. He held out a single sheet of paper, a copy of the donor list. Seeing her life catalogued in cold black ink made her sick. When she asked who he was, Matteo replied, "Security," allowing a ghost of a smile to surface before it was gone. A brief wince from Lorenzo revealed a crack in his own formidable armor. She immediately recognized the severity of his injury and challenged him about the broken lock. Lorenzo admitted it freely, explaining he'd summoned a locksmith at 6 a.m. with the story of a lover's quarrel. The sheer audacity of it sent a wave of rage through her fear. He conceded his trespass but claimed he had no more time. It was then her father rose, demanding to know who they were. Lorenzo raised a placating hand before introducing himself. He gave her father the unvarnished truth. His daughter's act of grace had saved his life, and for that, she was now a target. A mask of pure terror descended on Giorgio's face. In that instant, Izzy heard it, heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. Matteo confirmed her fear, 3, perhaps 4 hostiles. A cold dread settled as Lorenzo told her she had to choose now. The approaching steps saturated the air with a suffocating tension. Lorenzo articulated the possible outcomes like a grim prophecy. They would abduct her, seize her father for leverage, or simply execute them both as a statement. He deliberately left the most likely option unspoken, allowing her own mind to paint the horrifying conclusion. This wounded man did not match the legend, but the danger he brought was terrifyingly real. His face was a waxy, exhausted mask, with dark, bruised hollows beneath his eyes. He stood perfectly straight, one hand pressed to his side to conceal an agony he refused to acknowledge. He had not arrived with an army. This quiet entrance, a lone guard, and a bandage visible at his collar, felt intensely personal and far more frightening. The footsteps stopped. Matteo produced a silenced pistol with casual grace. "We are out of time," he said. The weapon stole the air from Izzy's lungs. Giorgio's protest, "No guns in my home," was a futile prayer against a new reality. Lorenzo inclined his head, his eyes fixed on her as he presented another path. "Then we shall leave it." Her defiance flared. "Leave? And go where?" "To a secure residence near Giudecca. For now. Then we determine what comes next." "You mean what you determine?" His features hardened. "No, I am trying with great effort not to." That confession of his struggle was more chilling than any command. A faint scratching came from the door. Matteo aimed his weapon at the sound. Lorenzo's voice lowered. "Izzy." She met his gaze. "When you aid a man like me," he said, "you attract the wrong sort of notice. My being here is the only clue you possess. It is the only advantage we now have." Another scratch, then silence. Behind her, Giorgio whispered, "Bella, you must go." She turned to him. "What?" His sightless eyes seemed to find her by the sound of her breath alone. Do you think me a fool? Men like that are not here to talk. If he is right, you have no choice. Hot tears stung her eyes. I am not leaving you. You are not leaving him, Lorenzo corrected. You are bringing him. Izzy froze. Lorenzo nodded to Matteo. Get the old man's coat? Before she could object, Matteo moved, taking Giorgio's coat with an efficient motion that was neither rough nor gentle. It was the cold competence of a man who understood that panic was a wasted motion. Izzy stood rooted in the doorway. Lorenzo's voice became softer still. This is my final offer of courtesy. A sharp click echoed from the hall as the new lock gave way. Her fear finally consumed her anger. She took a step back. Lorenzo entered, and in that single moment, with her father behind her, killers at the door, and the most feared man in Venice collecting a blood debt she never intended to offer, Isabella Moretti knew her life was over. Her world had shattered the instant she opened that door. The moments that followed were a blur, too rapid to comprehend. Matteo slid the bolt home behind Lorenzo, his eyes already assessing the room's tactical flaws. He saw the window, the hall, the rear door, to a tiny balcony. The apartment was a death trap. Izzy saw the grim conclusion on his face an instant before he spoke it. The front is compromised, he murmured. The balcony, Giorgio said, his voice steady despite his pallor. He took the coat from Matteo, his hand fumbling at the sleeve. Lorenzo noticed. Every minor sound seemed to register on him with profound weight. Though he had taken only 3 steps, the air itself felt warped around his wounded frame, making the room contract. He leaned against a chair, breathing evenly, his face a blank mask as he analyzed the muffled sounds from the hall. His absolute calm showed Izzy precisely why men would kill and die for him. Are those your people? She whispered. No. How do you know? My men would have announced their arrival. The logic was anything but comforting. A sharp scrape of metal on the door was followed by a muted curse. Matteo's gaze met Lorenzo's. They are using tools. A slow, deliberate nod was Lorenzo's sole reply. We must depart now. He moved to help Giorgio, but the old man flinched away from his touch. Do not touch me, Lorenzo immediately retreated. As you wish. That this powerful man would yield so easily only deepened Izzy's confusion. Matteo was at the back door, studying the rusty stairs. It should hold us, he reported. Probably. The word hung in the air, and Izzy heard herself whisper it. Matteo gave her a sharp look. There is no time for guarantees. The assault on the door grew louder. Giorgio's hand found her wrist. Go first, he pleaded. No, Bella. As the tension peaked, Lorenzo's voice cut through the room. You will go second, he commanded, his calm tone making the order all the more unsettling. Matteo, then your father. You are last. Izzy's eyes widened. And you? I will cover our withdrawal. You can barely stand. He met her gaze, and the sheer force of his will crushed her opposition. I can stand long enough. A loud crack from the front door shattered her remaining defiance. Matteo opened the balcony door, and a blast of cold canal air rushed in. He tested the stairs, then offered a hand to Giorgio. The old man, for once, swallowed his pride and took it. Matteo carefully guided the older man, his hand a firm anchor on his elbow. Izzy followed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Far below, the canal was a black ribbon of water between stone walls, where a single boat waited. Above, laundry lines sagged like ghostly nets. A view that was once familiar had become a place of disappearance. Behind them, a splintering crash signaled the door's demise. A voice shouted, Lorenzo appeared, slamming the balcony door and ramming the bolt home with his good hand. The bolt was a pathetic gesture, buying them mere moments at best. He trailed her with a deliberate pace that rivaled Mateo's, one hand clutching the railing while the other pressed against his wound. Down where the canal broadened, a nondescript workboat sat idling, its weathered white paint a study in anonymity, the type used for mundane deliveries. At the wheel, a man in a beanie smoked, his expression one of a person who'd seen it all decades ago. His gaze swept over Lorenzo. "You wear the face of a man already gone." Lorenzo's reply was sharp. "Not yet." The boatman gestured to Giorgio. "He boards too. Get in." Matteo tucked Giorgio beneath a canvas cover. Izzy followed, clambering aboard with trembling legs, a bag held tight to her chest. Lorenzo was the last to board, and as he heaved himself over the edge, she witnessed it. A flash of raw, unguarded agony. His jaw set so tight, his features went pale. The facade of command snapped back into place instantly, but she had seen the mortal man beneath the iron. Just as shouts echoed from the alleyway, the engine sputtered to life. Izzy instinctively dove under the tarp. They moved through the canal with the dull, forgettable rhythm of a service vessel as Matteo kept watch, his gaze fixed on the dark water they left behind. Giorgio was a seething effigy of rage, one hand strangling his cane, the other clenched into a tight fist. Izzy's stare was fixed on Lorenzo opposite her. He leaned on the hull, as if needing its support to remain upright. The injury looked far worse up close. His skin had a gray pallor, a film of sweat coated his neck, and a new dark stain was spreading across his shirt. He felt her eyes on him. "Say it," she started. "What?" "Whatever has been festering since I appeared at your door." The fear inside her finally calcified, sharpening into pure rage. "Fine. You had no right to shatter my life, to menace my father, to throw us from our home as if we were fugitives." "No," he countered, his composure a fortress. "I had an obligation." "To whom?" "To the woman who kept me from bleeding out on a hospital floor." Izzy's jaw tightened. "That was an anonymous donation. I gave blood to a name on a chart." His gaze remained locked on hers. "I am aware." "Then stop behaving as though I enlisted in some blood oath in your violent world." "I'm aware of that as well." A raw, hysterical laugh nearly tore from her throat. "Are you? Because it feels like your world just consumed mine." Before a reply could come, Giorgio interrupted. "Who are they?" Lorenzo turned his unnerving stare to the older man. "I don't know yet." From the boat's bow, Matteo spoke without turning. "That means he knows enough to be deeply concerned." Isabella watched them, a cold knot of dread constricting in her gut. "That isn't very reassuring," she murmured. Matteo's response was flat. "It's not meant to be." Lorenzo then turned to Giorgio, his voice low as he detailed the grim architecture of their new reality. "The assault at the hospital was a probe," he explained, "to verify he was alive. Once confirmed, they simply purchased the list of blood donors." "Hospitals sell private data like that?" Isabella asked, stunned. Lorenzo clarified. "Records are created, and anything that is created can be bought." When she pressed for a motive, his logic was chilling. In his life, everything and everyone was an instrument to be wielded. As her father began to protest, Lorenzo silenced him, his tone quiet but absolute. "That is precisely why you are on this boat." His declaration hung in the air, strangling all further debate. As the vessel sliced through the waterways, Isabella felt caught in a waking nightmare, her eyes scanning every shadow, her body coiled for an assault that never materialized. The city drifted past, a monument to their isolation. Tourists laughed on bridges, merchants hawked flowers. Another world, entirely unaware that hers had been set ablaze. The serene beauty of it all only deepened her sense of terror. After an eternity that was barely 20 minutes, the boat glided towards a derelict building on Utica, selected she knew for its ability to go completely unnoticed. The structure appeared abandoned, its plaster crumbling and its green shutters broken. Matteo slipped inside first, a phantom in the gloom, before signaling them to follow. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and rot, the ghost of some long-dead warehouse. Yet the apartment within was clinically sterile, its emptiness so profound it was jarring. There was no art, no literature, nothing to suggest a life had ever been lived here. This was a place for hiding bodies, not for sheltering souls. Matteo's voice broke the silence, outlining the new regulations of their 5-star cage. How long are we trapped here? Isabella's demand cut the silence. The answer, it seemed, hinged on whether this was a warning, a prelude to a ransom, or something far worse. Lorenzo's face was a taut mask of pain he barely contained, an exercise in control that felt like its own kind of menace. Both she and Matteo recognized his weakness. When Matteo offered to inspect the wound, Lorenzo deflected, turning to Giorgio and making small comforts conditional on the old man taking his medication. Giorgio's refusal was a final, impotent act of defiance. Matteo sighed. I'm advising you don't make this difficult. Conceding the pointless battle, Giorgio fell quiet and urged Isabella to simply comply. Once he was gone, she confronted Lorenzo, demanding the unfiltered truth. The shadow of a smile, frigid and devoid of humor, touched his lips. I have already told you the truth. She felt the lie in it, or rather a version of the truth crafted to ensure her obedience. A minute flicker in Matteo's eyes confirmed her suspicion, earning him a deathly glare from Lorenzo. Then, to end the discussion entirely, Lorenzo produced a folded paper, a new weapon in their psychological war. It was the list of donors, filled with photographs and notations. Lorenzo explained with a terrifying detachment. An informant at the hospital sold 3 names. Her own was on the page. She stared at the document. 3. The other 2, he continued, were merely diversions, put forth to see which target the enemy would strike. They struck her. A deep, penetrating cold began to spread through her. When she asked why, Lorenzo paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle, before delivering the final, soul-crushing part of the equation. Because they discovered that I had asked for your name. That he had chosen her was somehow more horrifying than a nameless enemy. You asked, she breathed. I did. Her follow-up question, why, drew a complete blankness from Lorenzo's expression. He told her what was in the nurse's file, a note she had written on the donation bag. A profound stillness settled over her. With a chilling reverence, he quoted the words, Non morira. A flush of heat crept up her neck. Her initial thought, what a foolish thing to write, was skillfully countered by his smooth reinterpretation. It was human, a calculated tactic, forging a connection through a shared, manufactured vulnerability. Matteo intervened, his gaze fixed on Lorenzo's injury. Lorenzo immediately stiffened, his pride a shield that Matteo met with a cool, clinical stare. Lorenzo issued a volley of commands designed to corner her psychologically. Her sharp retort, "And what if I say no?" was met with his utter certainty, "You will not." He then gestured to the mark on her arm, weaving her personal sacrifice into the fabric of their shared crisis, twisting her compassion into a grim duty. Before she could even parse the manipulation, his composure fractured for a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting glimpse of human fragility that, had Matteo not been there with the supporting arm, she might have missed entirely. Matteo offered support, earning a glare from Lorenzo that could cut glass. A look born not of pain, but of the raw shame of being seen as weak. Isabella stood frozen. The entire myth of Lorenzo, the untouchable force of nature, had just disintegrated before her eyes. The reality that he had bled for her was a greater shock than any threat. Her fear began to curdle, transforming from pure terror into a complicated sense of obligation. The following hour was tense. Matteo spoke in low tones on encrypted lines, while Giorgio simply stood by, a silent observer. Isabella was staring blankly at the kitchen counter when Lorenzo staggered back into view, clearly ravaged by his injury. She heard her own voice suggest a hospital, a textbook symptom of attachment to her captor. He instantly inverted her concern, turning safety into a vulnerability. The hospital is the source of the danger. Her conventional logic was crushed by his grim axiom. It makes the doctors themselves potential assets for our enemy. And with that, he positioned himself as her only viable protector. Then, his body finally surrendered and he collapsed into a chair. She did not register his collapse into the chair as a moment of failure, but as the curtain falling on his performance. A brief glance from Matteo signaled it was time to advance the narrative with a dose of actual truth. Isabella steeled herself, completely finished with his psychological games. Lorenzo fixed her with a heavy, weary gaze. The ultimate burdened king posture, a display of power far more effective than overt aggression. He finally began his account. 3 nights prior, one of his company's refrigerated transports had vanished without a trace. The truck's manifest listed medical supplies, a fiction her intuition instantly unraveled. As if on cue, Matteo pushed a dossier of shipping logs and grainy photos toward her. Lorenzo confessed he'd first written it off as a common hijacking. But the execution told a different story. A diverted truck, its cargo meticulously swapped, then reintroduced into the system with perfect forgeries. The surgical coldness of the entire affair began to creep into her soul. Her question was simple. So, they used one of your trucks? But Lorenzo's correction was a blade. One of my legitimate trucks. It was the language of a man who keeps his sins neatly categorized. His flat statement, for me, was not an apology, but the central pillar of his existence. The contents he named, counterfeit blood thinners and black market freezers, sketched the anatomy of a corrupt world he had completely mastered. The conspiracy was a cancer, its tendrils in shipping, supplies, and the sterile halls of hospitals. She finally gave the horror a name: fake medicine. Lorenzo not only affirmed it, but added stolen blood to the growing nightmare. Her words, "People die from that," caused Giorgio to physically recoil, but Lorenzo's only response was a cold, quiet yes. When she posited, "And you found out," he offered a grim correction. "I found enough to be marked for death." He was a survivor, you see, not a savior. The syndicate was also plundering donor registries, playing the markets with rare blood types. Her disgust was a physical thing, yet Matteo merely offered the cold calculus of business. Scarcity increases value. Izzy accused them of trading human lives like stock, and Lorenzo simply confirmed that in their world the assessment was correct. This was the precise moment an abstract evil became a breathing entity in the room. The file snapping shut was the sound of her innocence breaking. "My donation brought me into this," she stated. "You were conscripted," he corrected, twisting her reality to absolve her of blame. "That changes nothing," she retorted. "It changes your degree of complicity." Izzy drew a sharp breath. "Don't do that." His expression was pure calculation. "Do what?" "Speak to me as if a single polished sentence can erase a crime." For an instant, his composure cracked, revealing something akin to respect. "I am not trying to persuade you." "No," she shot back, her voice rising. "You stormed my home, tore me from my life, and put my father in fear. Now you claim my own blood, enlisted me in a criminal syndicate." "That sounds precisely like a man trying to manage the emotions in this room." Matteo looked toward the ceiling, searching for an escape. Lorenzo, a man made of stone, offered a slow, deliberate nod. "A fair assessment," he conceded. His calm agreement deflated her fury entirely. Before she could recover, he continued, "Control is my nature. An apology would be a lie. I am giving you the truth because deception would make you run or fight. I can survive either outcome. I am not certain you can." The threat was delivered with the dispassionate logic of an algorithm. Izzy's gaze fell back to the file, to a photograph clipped to the back. As she slid it free, she went rigid. It depicted a loading dock, two men handling crates. A broken corner on one box revealed smaller cases inside, each stamped with a gold crest. And then it registered, a crowned lion. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. "What is it?" Matteo asked. Izzy's hand tightened on the photo. "I've seen this symbol." Lorenzo's focus sharpened to a fine point. "Where?" She swallowed. "At the workshop?" Matteo's brow creased. "The costume shop?" "Yes." Lorenzo leaned forward, a minute motion that was entirely predatory. "Explain. Now." Her eyes remained fixed on that lion crest. "One of Bellini's VIP customers uses trunks with that exact logo. Not for gowns, but for masks, jewelry. Items considered too confidential for the regular staff." "The customer? I do not know his name." She searched her mind. "Bellini calls him Continue. He never smiles and wears black gloves. He commissions custom items for private events, masked balls. Sometimes he just leases entire collections." In that single moment, an entire conversation passed between Lorenzo and Matteo in a single glance. "You know who he is," she accused. Lorenzo's tone was perfectly neutral. "I am aware of him," which is a yes. "It means he operates through charitable fronts and shell corporations," Matteo interjected. "Galas, hospital benefits, church offerings. All of it looks pristine on paper." Izzy stared at the image, the pieces clicking into place in her mind. "He was at the workshop this Monday." "Are you certain?" "Yes." "How do you recall Monday so clearly?" "Because that was the day Bellini ordered me not to look at the client when he arrived." A grim, humorless smile touched Lorenzo's lips. "And did you obey?" "Of course." For the first time, Matteo seemed genuinely amused. Izzy ignored him, pressing on. "Bellini had me in the back, sewing. The client was out front speaking on his phone. He was furious, repeating the word donors. I assumed he meant wealthy patrons writing checks. It is how they speak. But now," her gaze drifted back to the photograph, "now I do not believe he was talking about money at all." The room fell utterly silent. Lorenzo surged to his feet so fast he swayed, gripping the table to steady himself. Izzy saw it. So did Matteo. "Sit down," she commanded, the words out before she could contain them. Lorenzo's eyes were locked on hers. "Sit," she repeated, her tone an instruction, not a request. "You are not authorized to collapse during a debrief." A corner of Matteo's mouth twitched. To her own amazement, Lorenzo actually complied, sinking into the chair as if in defeat. He clasped his hands, his gaze so intense she felt a flash of regret for her boldness. "Monday," he commanded, his voice low. "Recount everything." And she did. The trunk, the crest, her boss's panic, the gloved man, and the phrase that was now a chilling premonition. "Keep the clean list separate from the public list." Before she had even finished, Matteo was already writing. For a long moment, Lorenzo was motionless. "That," he said at last, "is the first tangible lead we have had since the shooting." Izzy was stunned. "Because of me?" "Because you were paying attention when anyone else would have looked away." She broke his intense gaze. From the next room, Giorgio's cane tapped the floor once. "Bella," he called out, his voice weak but firm. "If your employment is connected to these men, you cannot return there." "I know." "And if his foes have this address, this apartment is compromised." She knew that as well, but his saying it made the reality heavier. Lorenzo stood more slowly this time. "You will not go back there by yourself." That sounds like a command. "It is." She had a reply ready, but the buzz of Matteo's secure phone cut through the tension. All three of them froze. He glanced at the screen, answered, and after 10 seconds of listening, his eyes shot to Lorenzo. "The nurse from the donation room is gone." He explained she had left the hospital 30 minutes after the appointment and never reached her home. The blood drained from Izzy's face. "Nurse Marzia," she whispered. Matteo offered a sharp, grim nod. Lorenzo's eyes shut for a heartbeat. When they opened, they were utterly lifeless. "They acted faster than I anticipated." Izzy rests her hand on a chair, delivering the verdict. "Because of me." Lorenzo's stare hardens. "You are no longer the only witness." And with those words, the entire board is reset. This is no longer a rescue. It is a hunt with a fresh trail, and she's now a part of it. Izzy understands that she'd been clinging to the idea of Nurse Margia as random, tragic collateral. The truth was colder. Margia saw too much and was permanently silenced. "What does gone mean?" Izzy demands, cutting through the ambiguity. Matteo puts his phone away. Her shift ended at 7. She clocked out. We have video of her leaving. After that, she is a ghost. "Gone." Giorgio's voice echoes from the doorway. "People do not just become gone." Lorenzo's answer is soft and chilling. "In this city, they do." Izzy despises his tone, not cruel, just exhausted, like a man who has seen this scene play out 1,000 times. "Then we find her." Matteo nods. "That is the mission." "No," she counters. "Not your mission. Mine. You two operate as if you are the only players in this room." "That is because we are the professionals trained for this," they contend. "And I am the one who knows the workshop," she retorts. "I saw the crest. I heard the discussion of donors. If Margia disappeared because of what she witnessed, I will not stand aside while you two dictate my life." A heavy silence descended. Matteo looks to Lorenzo, who remains focused on her. He doesn't raise his voice. "You want to contribute?" "Yes." "Then understand one thing. Contributing is not about winning. It is not about being brave. It is not even always about being useful. Sometimes," Izzy retorts, her gaze steady, Helping means moving when your gut screams at you to act. And sometimes, he concedes, listening is just a more polite word for obeying. A strange expression flickers across his face before he gives a single slow nod. Yes, sometimes it is. In their broken world, that brutal honesty is what forges trust. Matteo returns them to the task, dropping a folder. Bellini opens at 10, VIPs arrive after 12. If our target is involved, the shop is a perfect front. Wealthy patrons, opaque billing, and deliveries no one would ever question. Fragments of her workplace clicked into a chilling mosaic inside Izzy's head. That locked room in the back, the clandestine appointments, the forbidden cases. Every elegant detail now screamed of complicity. Matteo suggested Bellini was merely a cog, his boutique a front. Giorgio's fatherly instinct flared. She is not returning to that place. Matteo agreed it was off the table. Then Lorenzo's jaw tightened. No. The single word was a verdict. As Izzy argued, he cut her off. The shop was hostile ground, and her opinion was now irrelevant. Her response was a blade of pure logic. Remove me from play, and your quiet access vanishes. Lorenzo was caught, acknowledging her truth while despising the danger. A cover is worthless if you're compromised, he retorted. Only if Bellini is aware, she replied, sidestepping the implication. Seeing the stalemate, Matteo offered a new strategy. He has faith in you. Phone him, claim illness. Say you forgot an item to test after-hours entry. Izzy understood her employer's habits. He loses his mind if he's disturbed after 6 o'clock. With a VIP present, he will deny me. His refusal is still a data point, Matteo noted. Lorenzo moved carefully, concealing a flare of pain as he gave the command. Place the call. At this moment, Izzy's words felt heavy in the silence. Now. She retrieved her phone, then hesitated, glancing at Matteo. You warned me against using this. He pushed a compact signal jammer toward her. Place it in here. She complied, keying in Bellini's number from memory. The call connected after 4 rings, his tone already frayed with irritation. Isabella, it is nearly 10. You are tardy. I will not be in the shop this morning. A moment of stunned silence echoed over the phone. Bellini sputtered, You are not what? I am unwell. You were perfectly fine when you left. My condition has shifted. Be unwell on your own schedule, Isabella. We have the Lombardi order. I was at the infirmary last night giving blood, she invented, her tone flawlessly faint. An urgent call. I almost collapsed on the way home. His interest was piqued, not by concern, but by alarm. You gave blood without my consent? Are you mad? You believed bleeding yourself would be beneficial. Izzy's gaze found Lorenzo. His expression was carved from stone. It was unforeseen, she answered. A sigh of exasperation crackled through the receiver. Very well, remain home, but if you are absent tomorrow, you are removed from the Belladonna fittings. Just before he could disconnect, she slipped in the true inquiry. Did Continro visit? The quiet that followed was charged. Bellini's tone returned, falsely breezy. For what reason? None. I forgot my thimble in the studio. If he visited, I thought it best to wait. That will not be needed, Bellini replied with too much haste. There are no patrons here. The intensity of Matteo's and Lorenzo's stares bored into Izzy. Are you certain? She pushed. I could retrieve it after noon if... No. Bellini's voice was frigid. You claim to be ill. Play the part of the invalid well, Isabella. We will speak on the morrow. The connection ended abruptly. Izzy let the phone fall. He is being deceitful, Matteo declared. Agreed. What was the giveaway? He never refers to his VIPs as clients around us. He gives them pet names. That term implies he was not alone. Lorenzo's face hardened, and the mention of Continro forced him to protect someone. He was afraid, Matteo argued. Izzy's eyes locked onto his. Fear and protection are not always identical. No, Lorenzo conceded, but here it is a distinction without a difference. He produced the dossier, revealing the image of a crowned lion. His gaze was fixed on the photograph as he issued his directives to Matteo. Examine 6 months of import logs connected to Bellini's boutique. Focus on medical foundations. If galas are his cover, the supply line will show a pattern. Matteo was already moving to the communications hub. Izzy rose. And what of me? At last, Lorenzo met her eyes. You will serve as bait, the assignment chafed. That sounds remarkably like inaction. It means you respond when Bellini contacts you. You reply to texts in character, and you convey any recovered memory to me the instant it appears. Should I deploy you, you act on my command, and my command alone. Your need for agency is immense. A faint smile touched his mouth. It verges on a clinical diagnosis. Before she could retort, Matteo's voice cut in. There is something else. He re-entered holding his tablet. Its display held an image of Nurse Marga in a corridor. She seemed taut, but not fearful. Then a single detail registered for Izzy, and a chilling realization enveloped her. Marga clutched the sleeve of a silver dress, its cuff exquisitely hand-sewn. It was a Bellini creation. No, Izzy breathed. Matteo's gaze shifted from the tablet to her expression. You recognize it? That dress is part of the Belladonna line. I completed that very cuff only yesterday. All the color fled from her tone. So, she was seeing somebody from the boutique. Or an affiliate, Lorenzo amended. Izzy gazed at the picture. But for what reason does Marga possess it? Giorgio proposed a perspective they had overlooked. Because it was presented to her. All eyes went to him. You people of influence find plots in every shadow. At times the answer is plain, a present, a token, a quiet directive for her next action. Izzy studied the image once more and understood. It was more than a garment. It was a marker. They are guiding her, she said, the realization taking voice. Lorenzo's attention on her was total. Where? Her thoughts raced, memory finally breaking through the fear. Visions of gowns, ledgers, and shipping lists appeared, along with Bellini complaining about a customer demanding a private viewing on a secluded pier. The San Pietro depot, she stated. Matteo's head jerked up. Explain that. An old storage facility by the church piers. Bellini utilized it for discreet appointments. Unmarked, with only a side entrance and a landing on the waterway. Matteo understood at once. An ideal location for an unofficial meeting with a nurse. Lorenzo surged to his feet, the chair protesting with a sharp cry. This time, agony was written plainly on his features. A hand flew to his flank, his composure shattering for an instant before the mask of control returned. Izzy stepped toward him instinctively. You cannot go anywhere in that state. His gaze was incendiary. Nevertheless, I must. No. The word carried far more force than she intended. A flicker of something crossed his eyes. Not warmth. Acknowledgement. Matteo spoke softly. If she is correct, Marga could still have value. That single statement silenced all debate. Lorenzo seized his coat. We depart immediately. Izzy was already pulling on her jacket. He noticed and barked, You have no part in this. She met his glare without flinching. You would need to restrain me. For a fleeting moment, Lorenzo Ricci appeared less like a commander and more like a man confronting an impossible choice. The very woman whose blood had saved his life was not made for the sidelines. This conflict would be complicated. Their entire standoff consumed less than 60 seconds. There was no luxury of time. You are not accompanying us, Lorenzo reiterated, taking the weapon Matteo offered. Izzy finished with her jacket. Then you had best shoot me, for that is the only method. Matteo emitted a soft whistle of genuine admiration. Lorenzo pivoted to confront her directly. You believe obstinance is your greatest asset? No, she countered. My recollection is, I understand Bellini's entire process. I am familiar with that structure. I can distinguish a business rendezvous from a captive exchange. You are both entering a snare, built from details I comprehend, and you do not. He seemed poised to refuse her again when Giorgio's voice sliced through the tension. Bring her along. Every head turned. The old man's chin was high, his sightless eyes fixed on Lorenzo. I have no affection for you. I may never. But if my child remains here while her thoughts are elsewhere, I will be forced to endure her pacing like a trapped beast. She is of greater service there than she is powerless here, a prisoner in her own mind, Giorgio stated. Father of the year material, Matteo mumbled. It is pragmatic, came the crisp reply. Following a long, intense gaze, Lorenzo offered Izzy a curt, decisive nod. You remain between us. A command from either of us is absolute. If I yell down, you are on the ground. If Matteo yells flee, you are already moving. Izzy's hand drifted toward a drawer containing Giorgio's small blade, a minor act of defiance. Matteo observed the motion with a weary breath. I would advise against it, she met his eyes. And why is that? Because if this evening goes wrong, that small blade will simply become another source of my regret. Before her reply could form, a disposable phone rang, fracturing the atmosphere. Following a brief, quiet conversation, Matteo ended the call and faced Lorenzo. Reva arrives in 10 minutes. When Izzy inquired about the name, Lorenzo clarified, a physician, one of the few whose discretion is purchasable. Dr. Reva appeared with even greater speed. A woman in her 40s, her expression broadcast a tolerance for zero nonsense, her hair secured tightly. She surveyed the chaotic tableau with no visible feeling. A distressed young woman, a blind old man, an injured crime lord, and his protector in a shabby apartment. In the kitchen, she examined Lorenzo's injury with a proficiency that suggested she had witnessed far more grievous things. Your sutures have given way, she stated without inflection. I am aware. Awareness does not correct the problem. I am not attempting to correct it. Understood, she concurred, her gaze fixed on the crimson stain spreading beneath the dressing. You are attempting to remain alive while behaving as if you crave death. The observation might have amused Izzy had the atmosphere not been so suffocating. With immense speed, Dr. Riva cleansed and rebandaged the injury, placed a spare dressing into Lorenzo's coat, and then addressed Izzy. If his complexion turns ashen, make him sit. If he claims he is well, he is deceiving you. Should the hemorrhaging resume, apply pressure here. Her finger jabbed a point just below his ribs. Firmly. Izzy agreed with a nod before the gravity of the instruction truly landed. Reba then assessed Giorgio's condition, adjusted his medication, and forbade him from departing the residence. The old man offered a token protest for appearances before conceding. His true victory was already secured by Izzy's inclusion. Within 5 minutes, their boat was a black scar cutting through the city's watery veins. The route to the San Pedro warehouse was short, made shorter by a driver who knew every hidden current. Matteo guided the vessel with one hand, his gaze a restless sentinel. Up front, Lorenzo wore his coat like armor, turning his face to the wind as if daring it to quiet the storm in his head. Across from him, Izzy sat in a self-imposed silence, knowing her own chaotic mind was just another danger. Lorenzo was the one to finally break the stillness. "Bellini," he said, "give me an assessment of his nerve." His loyalty was to coin, not to conflict. He lacked the spine for true peril. Pressure would shatter him. A single intense look would be enough. A ghost of a smirk touched Matteo's lips. Lorenzo gave a sharp, singular nod in return. The subject was closed. Izzy watched him, the thought forming. You wield fear as if it were your mother tongue. It's your entire lexicon. His eyes, exhausted and dark, but unnervingly steady, met hers. It was the first language I learned. She was the one to look away. As their boat moored behind the warehouse, the city's morning pulse began, a symphony of commerce and bells that concealed the sickness beneath. The San Pietro warehouse stood back from the water, its facade a blank slate, its high windows shut like sleeping eyes above a sprawling, rusted dock. Izzy knew the warehouse from 2 other times, both lost in the fever of carnival when Bellini required a sanctuary for clients who craved anonymity. She had the ground floor committed to memory, the entry hall, the changing rooms, the forest of costume racks, and the rear office with its unreliable lock. More critically, she remembered a side door in a narrow alley, an entrance Bellini reserved for furtive exchanges far from watchful eyes. She led them directly to it. The passage stank of moisture and old stone. At its end stood a steel door, painted to dissolve into the bland gray wall. As expected, it was sealed shut. Matteo crouched, his hands exploring the doorframe, while his gaze traced the wiring upward. The alarm line is cut, and the break is recent. They desired isolation, not observation, Izzy reasoned. Lorenzo drew closer, the warmth of his body a strange counterpoint to the biting air. How certain are you that Margia is within? I'm not, she conceded, but the belladonna sleeve was Bellini's signal, and this place is his private theater. It is the only sensible place to begin. An honest response, he murmured, just as a whisper of sound passed through the steel. A woman's soft, restrained cough. It was all the confirmation they would need. A silent understanding flowed between Matteo and Lorenzo. It was time. A quiet series of clicks announced Matteo had defeated the lock. The air inside the warehouse was somehow colder, thick with a palpable darkness. She is in this place. I know, Lorenzo clipped back. That does not simplify matters. His weapon held low, but at the ready, Matteo advanced past the initial row of garments. His eyes made a systematic sweep of the shadows, the floor, the partitions, and the grated walkway above. Lorenzo released Izzy's arm, only to move her behind him. She despised him playing protector, but she despised her own reflexive obedience even more. At the center of the vast space, partially veiled by mirrors, they saw Nurse Margia bound to a chair. She was not gagged, but her wrists were raw from the bite of ropes, and a deep bruise was beginning to bloom on her cheek. The silver belladonna sleeve was on the concrete beside her, like a fallen standard. Her eyes went wide when she saw Izzy. You should not have come, she mouthed. That statement, a voice drifted from the darkness past the costumes. is the most intelligent thing I have heard all day." As Bellini stepped into the pale light, a bizarre wave of relief washed over Izzy. It was gone in an instant. His face was a portrait of pure dread. Not sorrow, not defiance, only visceral fear. His fine scarf was absent, his shirt unbuttoned at the neck. One hand shook so violently he had to grip it with the other. From the shadows behind him, a second figure resolved. A large man in a dark coat and gloves. It was Continuo, his face finally visible. He was older than Izzy had imagined, in his late 40s perhaps, with streaks of silver at his temples and an effortless authority that could mute a room. His face was familiar from a newspaper clipping Bellini kept about a donation to restore a church. Adriano Vieri. The flicker of recognition in her eyes made him smile faintly. "Miss Moretti," he said, "what a tragedy that brilliance and poverty so often coincide. It does make survival a rather difficult enterprise." A small, wretched sound escaped Bellini. "I told them to leave her out of this." Vieri paid him no mind. "You told them many things." And then Vieri let the sentence fall. "Your period of usefulness is over." Matteo's weapon was instantly in his hand. A pointless show. 2 more men appeared on the catwalk above, holding a clear advantage. It was an ambush. Izzy registered it at once, but Lorenzo did not even blink. "You have become quite theatrical, Adriano." Vieri's smirk only deepened. "And you, Enzo, have developed a conscience." He said the name. It was a weapon, plain and simple. Enzo was a name used by those who loved him or by those who wanted to twist the knife. Vieri gestured toward Marzia. "Your nurse saw too much. Your benefactor recalled inconvenient facts. And that is the reason we are wasting a perfectly good day in this filth." Lorenzo's voice was a sheet of ice. "You were diverting hospital resources." Vieri merely shrugged. "Resources, donor contributions, peripheral transactions. The wealthy are afforded one thing, the poor are not. Existence is negotiable. I simply established the exchange." Nausea churned in Izzy's stomach. "You were bartering with human lives?" "I sold access," he corrected, his tone like silk. "To matches, to tissue samples, to coordinates, to the front of the line. You cannot conceive of what is paid for a dying heir or a celebrity's secret procedure." Bellini made a sound that was caught between a plea and a denial. "I only rented him the space. I was unaware of anything else." All traces of congeniality vanished from Vieri's face. "You were aware enough to falsify the records." Lorenzo's voice became a whisper. "You tried to have me killed over invoices." "No," Vieri said softly, unleashing the final twist. "I tried to have you killed because you started to ask where the true donor registry was." A dead quiet descended. Then Marzia, bruised and trembling, spoke. "It is tonight." Every head snapped toward her. Vieri's composure finally fractured. Marzia looked past Izzy, directly at Lorenzo. The transfer, the largest one, the masks, the donors, the secret auction, Belladonna Hall at midnight. They were using the fundraiser ball as a facade. The air left Izzy's lungs. Belladonna Hall was Bellini's most prestigious event of the year, a secret masquerade for the city's upper crust, all for a noble cause. Masks mandatory, no identities. It was the absolute perfect veil for the darkest of trades. Vieri sighed with great drama. "You see, this is why complications are so tiresome." His hand twitched, so did Matteo's. The first gunshot shattered a mirror, and the warehouse devolved into utter chaos. Matteo fired up at the catwalk. Lorenzo launched Izzy behind a clothing rack. The instant she was down, he pivoted, drew his own weapon, and fired twice into the corner where Vieri had been. Marja's scream sliced through the mayhem. Bellini hit the concrete as his entire reality shattered. A second mirror rained down in shards as bullets ripped through fabric. A high-frequency whine deafened Izzy to the fight. Lorenzo became a living shield over her, his arm braced against the rack. "Stay put. You're putting pressure on your wound." "Not the moment," Marja screamed again. Izzy saw Matteo drop an assailant with a single, clean shot, but the other continued firing. Bellini was scrambling for safety. Vieri had melted away behind several large trunks. "We can't just leave her," she cried out. An impromptu alliance declared in a storm of bullets. The muscle along Lorenzo's jaw went rigid. It was the absolute exhaustion in his voice, the sound of a man carrying far too much, that finally cut through her fear. He fired again, then his eyes found hers. "When I make my move, you go for Marzia. Cut her free. Matteo has the upper level. Don't play the hero. You release her. Then you fall in behind me. Understood?" Izzy swallowed against a throat suddenly made of dust and gave a sharp nod. "Understood." He moved before she could second-guess it. 2 shots, then a curse from behind the trunks. She heard Matteo's shout from above. Lorenzo carved a momentary vacuum in the chaos, and Izzy ran. When she got to Marcia, the nurse was simply paralyzed in a state of pure, silent shock. Izzy's fingers located the small knife Matteo had earlier waved off, and with unsteady hands, she sawed through the ropes at Marja's wrists. They fell free. Marja slumped against her, utterly depleted. "They have the guest masks," Marja whispered with urgency. "The numbered ones. The donor ledgers, a black book." "Where?" Marcia began to raise a hand at the same instant another gunshot cracked the air. Lorenzo twisted, the bullet burying itself in his shoulder instead of his chest. He staggered for only a heartbeat, but it was a critical one. Izzy acted on pure reflex, her hand shooting out to steady his arm, her other feeling the sudden spreading warmth as blood saturated his coat. The pain in his expression was instantly consumed by a cold, methodical fury. "Enzo!" Matteo's voice echoed, raw and with all protocol abandoned. The man now called Enzo took in Izzy's pale face, then his eyes snapped to the shadows where Vieri had vanished. "We are moving," he commanded, the strain in his voice revealing just how bad the situation was. This was no tactical fallback. It was a desperate scramble for their lives. As Matteo laid down covering shots, Izzy helped Margia. Lorenzo moved under his own power, but the growing stain on his shoulder spoke the truth. Bellini simply followed them, a shambling, weeping wreck of apologies. Terror had distilled his world to a singular imperative: follow the men with the weapons. An escape boat was poised at a service pier, a somber testament to Matteo's foresight before any shots were fired. As they cut through the water, the silence aboard was a physical weight. Marcia huddled beneath the blanket, wrists chafed, her face a void of shock. Bellini was trapped in a repetition, whispering, "I was not aware, I was not aware." Matteo's low voice finally sliced in, promising consequences if he uttered it again. The whispering ceased. Izzy's world narrowed to Lorenzo, her hands forcing pressure on the wound beneath the jacket he refused to shed. The round had passed clean through his upper shoulder, a minor wound that bled just enough to tear down any pretense of immortality. His face became a stoic mask that armor men wear when pain is a secret to be kept. "Keep pressure there," he commanded. "I am." "You are shaking." You've been shot twice in less than 24 hours. My hands are not exactly composed. Her sharp reply almost drew a smile from him. Almost. In the new sanctuary, a small, armored apartment, Dr. Riva was waiting. The doctor posed not one question about the new hole set atop the old. She simply slit his sleeve, dressed the shoulder, and issued a cold directive. If he attempted to leave within the hour, he would be sedated and bound. I believe you, he conceded. It would be wise. Izzy saw Marja sipping a sweet tea while Bellini sweated in the corner. Matteo began to lay out the contents of their bag with the detective's precision. A ring of keys, burner phones, receipts, 2 passes for Belladonna Hall, and a brass coin bearing a lion. The ledger, however, had vanished. Viry had vanished, and he possessed the proof. That vile truth poisoned the air until Marja's voice broke the tension. The ledger is not the sole copy. Every head in the room swiveled toward her. She drew a ragged breath. Not a hard copy, a data transmission. Tonight's list of donors is encrypted within the numbered masks for the hall. Izzy was adrift. What is that supposed to signify? Marja held her stare. The gala has bespoke masks made annually, correct? Vitted, numbered, recorded. The wealthy enjoy such theatrics. This year, Vieri layered an entire secondary system over it. Stitched into the lining of specific masks are numeric sequences. They resemble inventory numbers, but they are identifiers connected to the donor profiles. A strangled sound escaped Bellini. Oh, dear God! Matteo's focus became razor-sharp. And the black ledger is the cipher. The masks, Marja affirmed, contained encrypted information. The book translates it to names, blood groups, medical records, locations, emergency numbers, the complete file. Izzy's summation was stark. You're telling me they've made a charity gala into a marketplace for human beings? The accusation lingered. Lorenzo, confined to the couch by Dr. Riva's mandate, simply watched Marja with a terrifying quiet. How on earth could you know this? Marga's voice was barely there. A lab technician got drunk and started boasting. Said the rich played at being gods in the open while they shopped for life in the shadows. I wrote him off as an arrogant fool. Then I saw the list. The night you were brought in, I saw them pull the clean donor file hours before anything happened. That's when I was certain. Dr. Reva, having finished Lorenzo's bandages, stood. If that data is moved tonight, they will destroy the records by morning and continue trafficking for months. Lorenzo gave a curt nod. The operation was on. This means it concludes this evening. Izzy anticipated his move and countered it. No, she stated. He ignored her entirely, speaking directly to Matteo. We get in before the function starts. We secure the ledger, the masks, and Vieri if possible. His head of finance also, if she is present. Bellini turned ashen. Claudia Fieri, she manages all patron designations. She knows the code. Good, Matteo said, devoid of all emotion. We have one more name for our list. Bellini looked as if he might vomit. Izzy placed herself squarely in Lorenzo's way. You will not undertake this mission without me. Lorenzo's jaw hardened. Incorrect. Belladonna Hall is Bellini's territory. I know half the personnel. I fitted 3 of the guest wraps. I know the back corridors better than Matteo, and I likely know them better than you. So I will learn. You'll bleed to death on their polished stone and disrupt the entire event. Her rejoinder was like a gunshot. That is not the same. A specter of a smile played on Matteo's lips. Lorenzo leveraged himself to his feet. dismissing Dr. Riva's warning glare. The action was pure torture. "Listen to me closely, Isabella." Her full name was his weapon, used to force her away or to signal an impending conflict. "You were driven from your home, made a pawn, shot at, and pulled into this nightmare because you offered me aid. I am not leading you into Belladonna Hall if another option exists." She locked his gaze, refusing to yield. "There is no other option." A dense silence consumed the room, while Dr. Riva collected her equipment and quietly retreated from the confrontation. Lorenzo's stare seemed to dissolve their surroundings. His voice, when it came, was dangerously low. "At the hospital," he began. "When they said I had a donor, I asked for the name. I had to know why I survived. And then Marga gave me the bag." A rush of heat climbed Izzy's neck. "No more," he said, his tone becoming gentle. She swallowed. "That was a reckless thing to do." "No," he insisted, his eyes fixed on hers. It was the first act of grace she'd experienced in ages, a feeling that swelled inside her before he spoke again. "This is why I appeared at your door," he says, not from any sense of obligation. "I came because I knew that anyone with enough heart to write that for a stranger would be consumed by my world if I didn't reach them first." The room grew profoundly quiet. Even Matteo was watching, his vigilance lowered. Izzy's answer was a mere whisper. "You didn't know me at all. I hardly know you now. That is not a comforting realization." A faint, exhausted smile touched his lips. "No." Her gaze fell, settling on the emblem of his world, a new bandage on his shoulder and another concealed beneath his shirt. The flawless edifice of his self-control began to splinter, revealing the pain beneath. Her words were a definitive move. "You no longer get to dictate the risks I accept." This defiance shook him, not to weaken him, but to give him pause. He was a man confronting a truth that power could not bend to his will. "You think this is an issue of ego?" he countered. "And is there no merit to that?" His response was instantaneous. "This is an issue of consequence. To enter Belladonna Hall with me is to set fire to what remains of your old life." A dry, humorless laugh escaped her. That life was ash before morning came. The words struck him, twisting his features with a flicker of regret that made him look younger, a vulnerability that only amplified his lethality. It was Matteo who restored them to the present, his voice cold, tactical. "We are losing time. She must enter as service staff, not a guest. A guest is too noticeable, too restricted. Bellini will forge her papers without raising suspicion." Bellini, caught off guard, stammered, "I will?" "Yes," Matteo affirmed, his tone permitting no debate. "Think of it as a deposit against a profound karmic debt." Bellini's silent appeal to Lorenzo was severed by a sharp command. "Do as he says." A wounded nod was all Bellini could offer. From that point, a plan crystallized. Bellini would be the lead, with Izzy and Matteo in uniform at his sides. Bellini added, his voice unsteady, "The help is invisible as long as they stay silent." Lorenzo's approach was misdirection. He would arrive masked and late, allowing Vieri to think him either careless or absent, but never strategic. Marga and Dr. Rava would secure the safe house. Gio, still mending, offered a token resistance before conceding his wounds made him a risk. In the room where Bellini wrestled with his terror, Izzy initiated her own change. This wasn't about making a killer presentable. It was about forging a tool of complete anonymity. With items from Bellini's emergency supplies, Izzy began to construct an entirely new face. Her attire was a uniform of non-existence, plain black trousers, a dull blouse, and a simple coat, her hair pulled back severely. The whole presentation was engineered to make her a cipher, a phantom created for one purpose. When she returned, Bellini's relief was palpable. Matteo gave a short nod. Lorenzo's gaze, however, was sharp and appraising as it was when they first met. "You will fulfill the need," he stated. A single raised eyebrow was his version of praise, the cold appraisal of a perfect instrument. "Of course!" Bellini, fussing with his cuff, mumbled, "Do not deviate unless there is no alternative." Ironic from you. I discover my integrity when I am petrified. Matteo glanced at his watch. "We leave in 8 minutes." The tension in the space constricted, hardening into a singular, lethal intent. The final preparations were a quiet ballet. Bellini took the documents. Matteo inspected a concealed sidearm, and Izzy slid the brass coin into her pocket. By the window, Lorenzo moved with a pained, unnatural poise, securing a cuff over a fresh dressing. As voices passed outside, his quiet tone found her. "If this affair goes wrong, your only objective is to get clear?" Her reply was a firm, wordless shake of her head. "No." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Izzy." She closed the distance between them, her own voice a sharp whisper. "Shed the noble martyr role. It is a costume that fits you poorly." For an instant, a lethal light flickered in his gaze. "You believe you've seen my truth? I have seen the void where yours should be." The silence between them grew thick, almost palpable. He reached for her then, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. His fingers traced the ghost of an old scar on the inside of her wrist. That single point of contact felt like a lightning strike. "My end," he breathed, "would have bought you a far simpler existence." Her eyes held his, unblinking. "Perhaps, but you would have been the price, a cost I am no longer prepared to bear." The breath he drew was a sharp, brittle sound, like a fracture deep within his soul. Matteo's form in the doorway fractured the moment. "Apologies for breaking up. Whatever this is, the car is waiting." It was Izzy who recoiled first. As they made their way to Belladonna Hall, Lorenzo's hand dropped. The place was an entire economy built on masks, influence, and death, run by men who treated souls like currency. For Izzy, it was a universe she had only glimpsed from service tunnels and delivery bays. She understood the palace's hidden machinery, but had never seen the gilded illusion it presented to the world. The grand hall felt like a stage built for a tragedy. Music seeped from stone passages where servants moved like phantoms through the masked aristocracy. Gilded candlelight shimmered as hollow laughter echoed from the marble. Beneath the polished veneer, every allegiance had its price. Bellini entered on a tide of raw anxiety, acknowledging the steward before unleashing a torrent of complaints. The performance was flawless because it was genuine. Izzy saw then that his true power was the fusion of his professional indignation with his deepest, most primal terror. Matteo followed a step behind, his face the impassive mask of high-end security, a garment bag resting on his arm. Izzy played the dutiful assistant, her focus locked on a clipboard. They moved through the crowd like specters, utterly unnoticed. This was the nature of the decay, Izzy understood. The powerful are utterly blind to those who serve them. They found their initial lead in the VIP mask chamber. 42 velvet cases sat on display, each bearing a patron's insignia. The masks within were a menagerie of false faces, from polished devils to plumed seraphim. Shielded by the rising crescendo of Bellini's voice, Izzy surveyed the display. Stitched into the lining of every sixth mask was a small numeric sequence in silver thread. Marge's information was accurate. Izzy's expression remained a blank canvas, but her stomach twisted at the void where the ledger should have been. In its place stood Claudia Vieri, speaking in low tones to two men in formal wear. Younger than expected, perhaps 35, she radiated a cold sophistication, her only adornment a single perfect diamond. So Vieri was the benevolent public face, while Claudia was the predator, guiding the entire enterprise from the shadows. Concluding her conversation, she approached the display. Izzy feigned intense interest in a swatch of fabric. Claudia's gaze swept past her, settling on Bellini, who was escalating his panic into high drama. "Signora Veri," he shouted, "I cannot be held accountable for the artwork if your staff continues to interfere." Her smile was glacial. "Fortunately, Signor Bellini, your contract is for your artistry, not your insurance policy." His authentic meltdown provided the perfect distraction for her departure. The instant she disappeared through an archway, Matteo gave the directive. Back room, left corridor. Izzy responded with a single sharp nod. Bellini's theatrical rage created a perfect screen of sound, allowing Matteo to tail Claudia with his signature invisibility. Following a measured 3-second delay, Izzy took a tray of pins and started to move. The corridor branched away from the main festivities, leading to private lounges, spaces conceived for clandestine arrangements and buried sins. A lone guard in a tuxedo stood watch before a dark, polished door. This man was not hotel staff. He was a problem solver of the most permanent variety. Matteo entered first, citing a need for adjustments for patron 27, and was admitted with a cursory glance. 10 seconds crawled by. Izzy followed, murmuring about a request from Signora Veri for replacement clasps. The guard's profound apathy was a tangible force as he gestured her inside. Within, opulence was merely a cover for absolute depravity. Under a frescoed ceiling, the stolen ledger lay open on a table flanked by 3 mask boxes, 2 laptops, and documents bound in black ribbon. Vieri stood near the hearth, his features hidden by an ornate mask, conversing with Claudia and a director from a medical nonprofit. 2 other men examined a mask with surgical precision. A cold knot formed in Izzy's stomach. This was not about art. This was commerce. Claudia's eyes found her first. "What is that for?" Izzy presented the tray. "Replacement fasteners, Signora. You sent for them 10 minutes past. I came as quickly as possible." Claudia's stare sharpened. "Who sent you?" Before a fabricated name could leave Izzy's lips, another voice intervened. "I did. It was Lorenzo." He emerged from an adjacent room in a dark coat and a simple black mask, his presence filling the space as if he owned it. But his composure was a lie. His every motion was tightly controlled, his frame rigid with tension. Though it was hidden, Izzy could feel the pull of a fresh dressing beneath his shirt. Vieri turned. "Enzo," he said, his tone thick with false camaraderie. "I wondered which you would bring, the hammer or the scalpel. And here you are with one disguised as the other." Lorenzo methodically removed his gloves. "You dealt in hospital data. You sold patient records." Vieri dismissed it with a wave. "I merely tapped into an existing market. This city was for sale long before my arrival." The foundation director grew visibly uneasy. Claudia became a statue of ice. "You are in no condition to be here." Lorenzo's focus remained locked on Vieri. "And you should never mistake an injury for an opportunity." The conflict that followed was fought on 2 fronts. On the surface, a war of words. Vieri speaking of assets, Lorenzo demanding accountability, Claudia retreating into professional decorum, the director attempting to fade into the woodwork. But just beneath, a far more primal battle was waiting to erupt, one of raw, unforgiving violence. Matteo secured the exit, a silent sentinel. Izzy moved toward the table, a chess piece in a crucial play. Outside, the guard's boredom was hardening into suspicion. The masks now seemed less like finery and more like relics of the condemned. A phantom smile played on Vieri's lips. You, of all people, grasp the arithmetic of worth. You know loyalty is a commodity. I grasp the concept of lines, Lorenzo retorted, and you are standing here, feigning that you still have some. The reply was a physical blow. Izzy saw his rage then, truly unleashed. Not wilder, but chillingly lucid. You profited from the sick, he said, his voice lowering. You sold the records of donors. You hid weapons in a blood bank and called it logistics. Vieri's smile died. And you govern your territory with an iron grip and call it stability. Spare me the sermon. The word Lorenzo had used, boundary, finally resonated with Izzy. Men like these were masters of their own worlds, shaping the city to fit their designs. But Vieri had profaned something Lorenzo held inviolate. This wasn't just another sordid transaction. This was the commodification of human agony. That was the line. As Claudia's hand snaked toward the ledger, Izzy acted. The tray became a projectile soaring across the table with a sharp, metallic clang. The book skittered toward the precipice as Matteo reappeared. The room's brittle peace was irrevocably shattered. The hall guard burst in, weapon drawn. Matteo immediately became an immovable object in the doorway. Claudia's fingers closed on empty air where a donor file had been. The Foundation director flinched, a curse escaping his lips. Vieri dove for the ledger, but Lorenzo met his lunge with blinding speed. They collided with the table, a lamp toppling to the ground. The book was in Izzy's hands now, its weight a dense collection of secrets and compromised lives. A laptop slid off the table. Claudia came at her, propelled by raw fury. The composed executive had vanished, leaving a woman staring down her own ruin. Izzy turned into the charge, her shoulder deflecting the attack and sending Claudia stumbling backward. A command from Matteo cut through the bedlam. Lorenzo and Vieri slammed against the fireplace. A gunshot detonated behind her, its report deafening in the enclosed space. The doors to the ballroom were thrown wide. The music died. A tremor of panic surged through the assembly. Masked faces turned toward the suite at the precise moment Bellini performed his most courageous act. He shrieked, not with grace, but with the brutal force of a man weaponizing his own fear. Fire! His voice ripped through the opulent hall. Fire in the patron suites! The resulting chaos was instant and total. The perfect gilded world beyond the door disintegrated into a stampede. A servant fled. A piercing emergency siren began to wail. Shouts for assistance, for guards, for water saturated the air. In a single chaotic instant, a private war had become a public spectacle, the one variable Vieri's influence could not contain. Realizing this, Claudia lunged once more, not for Izzy, but for the priceless mask collection. In that fraction of a second, Izzy made a desperate wager. She ripped the lining from one mask and tossed the silver-threaded strip into the hallway. It caught the chandelier's glow, a shimmering piece of evidence for the panicked crowd. She repeated the act twice more. Their encrypted sins were now scattered for all to see. What is the meaning of this? Claudia's voice tore through the air, thin with terror. I am making it impossible for you to pretend. Izzy's reply was cold steel. Matteo had already neutralized the director and his guard with brutal efficiency. Down the now swarming corridor, Bellini's warning still hung in the air. By the hearth, Lorenzo and Vieri were locked in a desperate, graceless struggle. This was no contest for power. It was a primal urge to erase the other from existence. Vieri's hand scrabbled for a fallen firearm. Izzy caught the movement. Enzo! Her call sliced through his rage. Lorenzo spun, shattering Vieri's wrist against the unyielding stone. A shot exploded, burying itself in the floor. In 2 long strides, Matteo sent the weapon skittering into shadow. It was finished, not with elegance, but with a final, brutal certainty. In less than 60 seconds, their world had unraveled. The hall became a sea of uniforms, the air thick with shouts of smoke and violence. Claudia, her hands bound, offered a frantic, nonsensical tale of charity files and crisis. The director was mute, his face a bloodless mask. Vieira, his calm a fragile veneer over a split lip, said nothing as Lorenzo loomed above him. Between them, the ledger lay open, a silent, damning confession. When an officer demanded who was in command, 5 voices, Bellini's among them, answered at once. 2 hours passed. The Venetian night bled into the bruised purple of an unwilling dawn. Formalities began. Statements were recorded, and lawyers materialized from the shadows. Whispers were already spreading through the city's veins, carrying names too powerful to be buried. All the evidence, the files, masks, computer, and the ledger, was secured before Vieri's influence could make it vanish. Margia's testimony would be the final lock on the cage. On the landing, Izzy drew her coat tighter, feeling the adrenaline give way to a profound cold. Lorenzo emerged moments later, his own facade stripped away. He looked exhausted, older, yet somehow more real than ever. A dark stain of dried blood marred his cuff. Beneath his torn jacket, his shoulder was bound in gauze. The bruise on his temple was deepening to shadow, but his gaze remained sharp. A long silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. You cast the masks into the hall, he finally stated. It was an impulse. A weary ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes. And it was absolute. She turned her gaze away. I saw no other way to make it too big to hide. You saw the only way. Silence fell again, fraught with tension, but free of anger. He moved closer, giving her every chance to retreat. I warned you simplicity was over, he murmured. It is. She met his gaze with unvarnished truth. I came here so your world couldn't devour me. She held his eyes. It didn't. He conceded the point, his voice a low rumble. No, you refused to allow it. A clean, sharp respect washed through her, not a sense of obligation. So what happens now? She demanded. He laid out the wreckage. Vieri is neutralized. Claudia will break or be broken. Bellini now belongs to the state. Margia is protected. Your father will vanish before sunrise. And you? She countered sharply. He paused. Me? An unknown emotion clouded his features. You decide if I disappear now. This was the moment the beast was meant to bare its fangs. Yet there was nothing. Instead, he stood before her, broken, lethal, and yielding all control. The images replayed in her mind. The hospital, the blood, the warehouse, the book, and the truth crystallized. Lorenzo Riachi's ultimate power was not the control he seized, but the authority he was prepared to surrender. I don't think you get to simply walk away, she said, calling his bluff. The weary smile returned. No. He bridged the final distance. Isabella, Her correction was quiet but solid. Izzy. His eyes held a beautiful deception, a lie she knew she would forever crave. Izzy. If I stay, there are no conditions. No debt, no favors, no gratitude. She swallowed. And you stop fighting my battles for me. He conceded with a silent nod, and a sound tore from her throat, shattering the tension. He moved in slowly, testing the edges of her new-found authority, and she met him with absolute stillness. Reading her silence as consent, their embrace was not possession, but a visceral acknowledgement that they had survived the inferno. Their universe had been irrevocably overturned. Now, the postcard beauty of Venice was a gorgeous lie, masking the ruin beneath. Our protagonist, Isabella Moretti, already a target by name, had begun her day expecting only the familiar kind of danger. What she received instead was a baptism by fire, a soul-scarring trauma, and a devastating truth about the man whose plan to shield her had instead drawn her into the flames. Her world was not shattered by a straightforward assault. The truest indicator of her internal state is her choice to remain when a path to freedom lay open before her. This so-called choice, you see, is a textbook symptom of a trauma bond, a cruel trick of the psyche that rewrites a harrowing ordeal and recasts it as a dark, compelling love story.
Lesson: the cruelest betrayals do not come from enemies, they come from systems that smile while they feed on the desperate. Let's be honest, at first this looks like classic chaos bait. Poor girl saves mafia boss shows up at her door, boom, instant danger, instant chemistry, instant life upgrade with bonus trauma package. But the real knife twist is not the romance, it is the hypocrisy. Because the most evil people in this story are not the men who openly look dangerous. It is the polished ones, the gala people, the foundation people, the we're doing this for medicine and philanthropy people, the monsters and cufflinks, the parasites with donor list. And that is exactly why the story hurts. Isabella spends her whole life at the bottom working, stitching, counting, surviving. People like her are told the world is hard, unfair, competitive, unfortunate. Fine, but then she accidentally finds out the system is worse than unfair. It is curated. The suffering is organized. There are people in nice rooms deciding whose blood matters, whose desperation can be sold, whose illness can become leverage. That is enough to make anyone furious. And then the story goes for the emotional kill shot. Lorenzo, the man everyone should logically fear first, ends up being one of the only people in the room who reacts to that line being crossed with genuine rage. Not polished concern, not PR sorrow, rage. Because even in his violent world, this is filth. This is people turning emergency into a luxury market. That contrast is nasty in the best way. It forces the audience to confront something uncomfortable. A person can be dangerous and still have lines, while respectable people may have none at all. Now look at Isabella. She is not built for this world, but she is also absolutely not the fragile flower some scripts would turn her into. She clocks details, she makes connections, she argues when controlled, she helps rescue a nurse, she rips apart the coded masks in the middle of a gala and basically says, "You wanted secrecy? Congratulations, now everyone gets a front row seat." That is not just bravery, that is emotional rebellion. Because the biggest trap in stories like this is not physical capture, it is being made to feel small inside a giant machine. And Isabella refuses that. Every time somebody tries to reduce her to the donor, the witness, the girl to protect, she answers with action. She keeps forcing the narrative to include her as a person. That is the lesson viewers actually carry away. The moment a person stops accepting the role others assign them, the story changes. And yes, let's talk about the emotional landmine at the end. Lorenzo does not win her because he saves her, he almost loses her every time he forgets she is not something to manage. What makes the connection work is that by the end he asks instead of claims, he leaves room. That is huge. In a world full of ownership, he offers choice. That is rarer than love. So the final takeaway? Brutal but true. Life will introduce people who look like safety and are poison, and people who look like danger and force you to confront your own strength. The answer is not to trust appearances. The answer is to watch what people do with vulnerability. Do they exploit it, trade it, dress it up, or do they protect it without trying to own it? That question exposes everybody.